My name is Steve. I'm the cemetery supervisor, and I'm really glad that you're all here for this tour. If you have questions, I want to hear the questions, okay? But the idea is that we are going to walk from headstone to family plot to headstone, and I'm going to tell you about those people, and I'm also going to ask you some questions. So anybody got any questions? Yes?
Do you know if any Vietnam vets are buried here from the war?
Well, we have veterans from every war, from the Revolutionary War right through up to Vietnam, okay? Where specifically they are, I'm not going to go to the Vietnam War, but we will go to other wars while we're out there. What we're going to do now is we're going to go across the street and we're going to go down to the bottom of the steps, and then we're going to, at the bottom of the steps, we're going to go to our left, and that's where we're going to start. How many play baseball, basketball, football at Humble Park or know where Humble Park is? Well, right here we have Jack Humble. Okay, Jack Humble was a mayor, and Humble Park is named after him. How about Gifford School? Anybody know anybody that goes to Gifford to school or has been at Gifford School? This is Mr. and Mrs. Gifford. If you look up on top, this is brand new. I got this yesterday because I met with the Jersted family. We've heard of Jersted Agerholm. This is the Jersted part of it. Mr. Jersted, Leroy, did my job for many years as a cemetery superintendent. The interesting story behind Mr. and Mrs. Jersted is that as they got older, Mrs. Jersted had a heart attack, and they rushed her to the hospital. Of course, Mr. Jersted went along with them. Mrs. Jersted was admitted, put into a room, and a few minutes later, Mr. Jersted himself had a heart attack. So he was admitted down the hall. Now, he was really not aware of things. He did not know that 2 hours before that, his wife had passed away. When the nurse went in to tell Mr. Jersted that his wife had passed away, and this is what the nurse said, Mr. Jersted uttered the words, "Helga, I'll be right there," and he passed away. I just found that out recently. Now, if you look over to the left, my left, your right, you'll see an interesting name right next to the Jersted. Doctor. Interesting name. He was a doctor, last name Doctor. But who can tell me how old he was when I buried him? 108. He's the second oldest person I know that's buried in here. The oldest person I know that was buried in here was 111, and the woman actually attended Abraham Lincoln's funeral. So Doctor was a doctor. And when I buried him, I had a chance to talk to his 82-year-old son. And when he was a doctor, didn't have much in the way of medicine like we do now, his son told me the story of how one time there was a mine cave-in, and a miner was trapped in there and needed medical attention. So they called Doctor. He went there, went inside the mine, took his tools in, and came out with his tools, an empty bottle of whiskey, a saw, and a miner with one leg. That's how they did their doctoring back then. So, be thankful we live now.
What do the symbols mean on each grave between the star and the cross?
The symbols that you see are, for instance, on Jack Humble, this is a Freemason sign. Okay? He must have been a Freemason. That was important to him. Over here, Mr. Gifford, that's the World War II 32nd Division. Highway 32 is named after that division. They were instrumental in winning World War II for us. So they were very important. If you see the cross, it's a Christian symbol. We service the public. We don't worry about what you believe. Okay? So everything here means something. All these symbols mean something. I'll explain more when we get up there, But symbols, that's how people remember their loved ones and what they were, what they did. You'll see the doctor sign up in here. You'll see the lawyer sign up in here. So I hope that answers your question. Now next, what we're going to do is we're going to go along our fountain, up the steps, and into the cemetery. This is Albert Knight and the rest of his family. Now, Albert Knight came here shortly after Gilbert Knapp. In fact, Gilbert Knapp wrote him a letter and said, this country is so beautiful, so fully wooded that you should come here. You should come here and start a business. So, although he was in ill health, Albert Knight left his family in New York and traveled this way. However, by the time he got to Chicago, he was so broke. He had to sell his horse and almost everything he owned that he had with him. And in the month of February, walked from Chicago to Racine. Yes. So kids, the next time you say you have to go walk to school and you grumble, think of Mr. Knight walking 90 miles in February to get to Racine, where he started that business, and that business still exists today. It's called the Knight Berry Title Company. We're going to go to the next one. This is an interesting one. This is another interesting name. The name is Lot Search, and he was a soldier. He was a soldier in the Revolutionary War. When was the Revolutionary War? 1800s? Before that. When did we fight for our freedom as a young country?
1776.
Absolutely. 1776. Okay, that was our Revolutionary War. This is a Revolutionary War hero. We have 3 confirmed Revolutionary War soldiers here. We think there's one more, but we haven't been able to positively identify that. And Lot Search came here in the last 8 years of his life to live here. His family was here. He was actually buried here before the cemetery was dedicated as a cemetery. Lot Search actually served out in Trenton in the New Jersey area and fought with our first president, who was? Right. Now, kids, what color hair did George have? He wore a wig, you're absolutely right. He had red hair. He was known as a stern general with wispy red hair. This is Alexander Hessler, and he was an early photographer when photography was just kind of brand new. As a matter of fact, he was one of the 3 favorite photographers of our 16th president. Now, who was our 16th president? Alexander Hessler was one of Abraham Lincoln's favorite photographers. The story goes, all of the 1860 presidential campaign posters, pictures that you see of Abraham Lincoln, were done by Mr. Hessler. Abe Lincoln didn't think that he was such a good-looking guy. As a matter of fact, in one of the presidential debates, his challenger accused him of being a two-faced politician. And he looked over at his challenger and said, "Sir, if I was a two-faced politician, do you think I'd be using this face?" So, a little girl wrote him a letter and said what in that letter?
She said you'd look more distinguished with a beard.
A little 7-year-old girl said, "I think you would look much better if you grew a beard." He did, obviously became our president. Follow me. The Woodland Indians, before this was a cemetery, used this as their burial grounds. And if you look, you'll see the mounds. You can look behind, you can look over behind, you look over here, you look over here, okay? In Mound Cemetery, this was Native American land. It was purchased from Jacques Willamette and his wife Eventually, Jacques Willamette went south and founded Wilmette, Illinois. The city took this over and started to bury their dead in here. There are originally 125 mounds that went this way, all the way across the street and over towards Lincoln Field. Lincoln Field actually was a huge cornfield at one time, and the Native Americans had a campsite up there so they could watch, so marauding tribes couldn't come down and steal their corn. How this worked for the burial of the Native Americans, from the best I understand, is that when they were buried, they were placed in the traditional sitting position and facing the east, and they would place logs, bark, or whatever around them, and then put the dirt on top of them. Obviously, the body decayed and went down, and the next person went, and they would do the same thing, and thus you have different size mounds. Now, when Philo Hoy and Increase Lapham first thought this would be a great place for a city cemetery because it was so beautiful with the trees and everything, the city council really didn't want to. The citizenry said, no, we don't want to be buried by a bunch of heathens. So when the land was sold, it was understood that the mounds would not be touched. This was sacred ground. The first thing they did when they got their hands on it is they opened up these graves to see what was inside. Yes. And they found inside the way that these Indians were buried. But oddly enough, the key thing here is that these heathens were facing the east, which even in religions today is important, because if you're a Christian or other religions, the Lord's coming back, he's coming back that way. The sun rises that way. It was very important. The Native Americans thought this was Mother Earth, and that's how they respected her. This was what gave them life. Yes?
Why were they buried in the mounds and not like in underground like all the other ones?
That was their way of burying people. Just like I explained to you, some people don't want to go into the ground, so we have crypts. Some people don't want to be cremated. They want to go into the ground. Death will affect all of us. So you're going to have to make choices as you grow older. This was a choice. This was a way that they did it. Now, the Apache, the Cherokee, the Navajos, they did different burials. They did sky burials, for instance, where the body was raised up and left to decay. That's what you see in the movies most times, okay? That's just their way of burying it that gets the spirit to heaven quicker. Their body has now been offered back to the Creator as the Native Americans. So this way, because that's the way they did it, they would put logs around you and then they would pile dirt on you. So in effect, you were being buried underground, you just weren't having a grave dug.
Who originally designed the cemetery?
To the best of my knowledge, Philo Hoy was instrumental in getting the first 16 acres that they purchased laid out in graves. Yes?
How many Native Americans are buried in each mound?
Between 1 and 3.
Do you know what kind of Native Americans were buried here?
They were the woodland Indians, called the mound builders, because they built effigy mounds. An effigy mound is a symbol. And I will explain to you a little bit more of that when we get into the back of the tour. Okay? But now they're considered part of the Potawatomi clan tribe.
Why was the number 1 to 3? Why was the number 3 or between 1 and 3 and not higher?
I understand that in these mounds, the larger ones contain 3 and the smaller ones might contain 1 or 2. You had to be of high status in the tribe to be buried like that. So these are all what they would consider high status, such as maybe a chief or maybe a great warrior. This is 2 trees. It's called a candor tree. And the story goes that in Mound Cemetery at one time, we have 35 what we call blocks, 35 large areas. Right now we're standing in block 3. There were 2 men in each block. We had about 70 people taking care of that. And it was their job to make everything look nice that you see around here. But they did it by hand and not the way we do it today. So somebody got the idea that to put different vegetation in, plant different flowers, plant magnificent trees, and they did this. They would plant 2 trees together. And how they did this is they would cut off the top of this. See the line? Okay. See the difference in bark? This is an elm, and above it is a Spanish elm, and they grow together. They really don't do that anymore. Okay, so this is quite the rare tree. We have, I only think, 2 left in the cemetery.
How would they get the trees separated from each other between one bark to the next?
It's called grafting. And again, what they would do, this tree was probably a couple inches round, and they cut off the top of it, and then they took the bottom part of a Spanish elm, and they actually would cut down the middle and then put a bare branch in there, and then you put a big wrapping around it, a big bandage around it, and the trees tend to grow together. It's called grafting.
How long would it actually take for the 2 trees to fuse together?
Would only be able to guess on, because trees need a lot of care, and to do that I would venture to say 3 years before they were confident that they had grown together. And again, it was a matter of pride for these guys to work in here. They were in this section. They wanted to do better than the other guys in that section. So this was very important to guys. As you get older, this place will become more important to you as it goes along. And when you work in here, you see really the life that's out there. And that makes you want to do better. These are slaves. These are our 2 slaves. And if you know a little bit about Racine's history, Racine was very instrumental in the Underground Railroad. There was a man buried in here by the name of A.P. Dutton, who was a captain on the Great Lakes, and it was said of him that he shipped as much grain as he did slaves. He knew all of the captains on the Great Lakes that would take the slaves from here, put them on the ship, and get them into Canada, where there was no slavery. They were free. This here's George and Martha Sublet. And it was said that George was a man who towered amongst men. Now, when George first came here, slavery was still in the South. It was not in the North. So he thought he could live here. Unfortunately, he was captured by bounty hunters and brought back to the plantation that he was a slave at. It was down there that he met Martha, his wife, and again, they both escaped. They came north, and by that time, Abraham Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Yes, that's great. And they lived out their lives as ordinary people here. However, again, it was said that George was a man who towered amongst men. When George died, he was 6 feet 9 inches tall. So you could stand on one end of Main Street, look on the other end of Main Street and say hi to George, because the average height was only 5'6", and he towered amongst men. Another slave story. Does anybody know the story about Joshua Glover? Joshua was a slave. He was captured and put in the Racine County Jail. And this upset a bunch of people, and they were going to hatch a plan to go into that jail and bust him out and send him back to his slave master. Well, some citizens in Racine got wind of that, and they moved him to the Milwaukee County Jail. Okay? Well, somebody found out about that, and kind of went up and blew up the Milwaukee County Jail and put Joshua on a boat and sent him off to Canada. So the point of is we were so adamant. We did not like slavery, that we were part of that Underground Railroad. We helped set people free. That's how important Racine is to history way back then. This is the monument of Matthias Ahrens. And here's where I like to talk a little bit about cemetery symbolism, because you asked the question back in the crypts, what do the little signs mean? Everything that you see around here is symbolism. Everything means something. For instance, up on top, you notice the angel. The angel is our guide when we pass away and leads us up to heaven. She's also watching over the people that are here. Notice in her hand that she has a wreath. A wreath. We have a wreath at Christmas time. The wreath is a sign of constant. It keeps going on. Life will continue. Those flowers represent the family. Notice in her other hand, though, there's been a flower that's been picked from that wreath. That's death. That means death. Someone has died. She's picked it. She's now going to take care of it. We go down here to this, Matthias Ahrens, and what you see here is called a death mask. Quite common over in Europe. This is made of zinc. It's not real popular over here. I only know of about 3 of them in the cemetery. But this is, before he died, this is how he looked. They took a plaster or somehow got a mask out of it and turned it into zinc and had it installed on his headstone. Now, Matthias Ahrens was a shopkeeper. And it was a common thing back there to have a tavern next to a grocery store. If they had that today, I would be calling my wife every day and say, "Do you need milk?" Okay? But they don't, so I just go home. All right, so just a common person. But everything you see in here, everything on top, everything is a sign of comfort for that. So everything you see here means something to somebody. So when you come back, try and keep that in mind.
If he's just like a common man who works in a shop, how much would this cost for him to put his mask and have a high statue?
You have to do the comparison. If this were today, I would guesstimate right around $30,000. But back in those days, remember, they made $1 a day. So with that, he could have probably paid about $500, and that was a lot of money for that. It's a very personal choice, whether you want to invest a lot of money or you don't want to invest a lot of money. So, okay. It's all a balance of things. And as we get back, I'll show you some newer ones, and I will tell you the price of the newer ones. This is the family of Harold Agerholm. Now, that's part of the Jerstedt Agerholm. What we first saw, this is the other part. Harold Agerholm was a Marine. Harold Agerholm was in a medical unit. Now, in the war, World War II that he was in, medical units, they didn't have guns with them. The Japanese knew this. And so a Japanese sniper's nest was set up on the hill outside their medical tents. And with a machine gun, shooting bullets at Harold for over 3 hours, he drove back and forth from the medical unit to the safe zone, rescuing 33 Marines from certain death. When he went back to get the very last Marine, he himself was wounded. And because of getting the wrong information, it was called a tote tag back then, he was put to the back of the line and he died of his wounds. So, President Truman, hearing this story, he had saved 33, he risked his life for this country, for the freedoms that we now stand here and enjoy today during World War II. He was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. I've had the privilege of seeing that very medal and the flag that draped his casket. And he also had the honor of this ship named in his honor nearing the end of the war. We have had the privilege of 2 Medal of Honor winners in the city. That's why we have Jerstead Agerholm. And this is his mother and this is his father on either side of him.
What do the torches on the actual gravestones symbolize?
The light of life. Okay, you're in darkness, you have light. Death is darkness, the fire is light.
Okay.
Again, cemetery symbolism. It's all through here. When someone in your family dies, which is going to happen, you're going to think of things that you want that make you remember what you did with that person.
Her maiden name is Tetzloff or something like that. Was she an immigrant or was she just descended from someone?
I would be willing to bet that she was an immigrant. Pretty much all of your families really were immigrants. Okay, it was only the Native Americans that were here, and then everybody else immigrated here or across the country. What you see on there is that was her maiden name, and she wanted to have her maiden name on the stone.
Why are there the dips in the ground?
Wood put into the ground deteriorates, it rots away. And when it deteriorates, it collapses, and the grave collapses upon the occupant, the deceased person in the grave. That's why you have this in old cemeteries. Now today, we don't allow that. What happens is that when someone passes away, and you will probably experience this, you will go to a funeral home and you will pick out a casket and you will pick out what they call a vault. A vault is a concrete box that the casket goes into. We require those vaults in here because the concrete will not deteriorate. And when we put the person in, when you see us lowering that casket into the ground, it's being lowered into a concrete box. Then after that, a concrete lid is put on top. Then after that, we fill with dirt. And you have what you see in the graveyards. After that, the grounds crew, my employees, my workers, come by and we fill the grave with water. By filling the grave with water, it pulls down all the dirt around and settles that grave. It settles the grave to within about 6 inches, and we put black dirt on top, and twice a year we put sod on, and then we try to make it with this. But as you're walking through here, you're going to notice a lot of this because we're over 150 years old. And before they had tractors and everything, in order to dig a grave, they had to dig it by hand. Okay, they had a digging crew. Now, I've done these tours for kids, this for a long time, 10, 12 years, whatever. And I have a challenge for all of you. The next one we go to is called My Treasure Box. The challenge is that if you can figure out how to open that treasure box, I will split 50-50 whatever's inside. But, a couple of rules, all right? No sledgehammers, no dynamite, no RPGs, okay? No hand grenades, no nuclear fusion allowed. Tell me how to open it. That's all I have. Tell me how to open it, and if we can get it open, I will split it with you. All right? So I want you to follow me over to the next one, the treasure chest. This is Alvin Mead, and Mead Street is named for him. He delivered packages and goods. He worked for the American Express, downtown Racine. And this is what he would load his packages in and then go to deliver them. So when he died, his parents thought this would be a great way to remember him because this is what he loved to do. And again, cemetery symbolism. It looks like the trunk. It's got its hinges. It's got the handles on it. It's got a little lock on the front. It's solid marble. And if you touched it, you felt the little sandiness to it. That's because it's a limestone, okay, a sandstone. It's easy to carve on. Over here, granite. Granite will be forever. Weather won't bother it. So, any questions? Okay. Yes.
Is there actually anything in there?
No. This is a headstone. Again, I'm standing on Alvin. Okay? So, but this is how his parents loved him and wanted to remember him. And when you come back to the cemetery alone, just remember, this was somebody's son, brother. Respect the cemetery. This is Mayor Swoboda. Now we have 37 mayors buried in Mound Cemetery. Jack Humble was one, this is one, 37 scattered about. Mayor Swoboda has the honor of being the first mayor in the city of Racine to be in jail while in office.
What?
Yeah, he was allowing gambling to go on in the taverns, and that was illegal. They arrested him, he spent one night in jail, and then they bailed him out, and he went back to work. He really was a socialist. He loved the people in that respect. He started a lot of the soup kitchens and the homeless shelters that have now kind of continued on to help the poor people for the city of Racine. Any questions?
Does the cemetery have to approve the headstones, or are the families allowed to do whatever they would like?
That's a very good question. And yes, I do approve what can go in there. Although, as you look around, you see a whole bunch of interesting headstones. And as we continue on, we'll see more and more interesting headstones. We do have rules that I have to approve what goes into Mound Cemetery. This is another mayor for the city of Racine. This is Martin Secor. He was a really colorful person, as he was described by various newspapers. Now, you remember the treasure chest? He made those trunks. Started out in his kitchen making these trunks. He became very wealthy making those trunks, was considered the best trunk maker this side of the Mississippi. He was so popular that he became mayor. He also has the honor of being the only mayor in the history of the city of Racine to have an assassination attempt placed on his life. He liked to ride in the front seat of the car, and somebody put a bomb underneath the front seat of the car. Bomb didn't go off, he walked away. When the guy went back to see why the bomb didn't go off, justice was served. He was not killed, he was arrested, prosecuted, spent many years in jail. Now, the question before was, do I have to approve headstones? And here's where I say, yes, it has to be approved. If you read this was such a controversial saying because it mentioned God and the devil in the same paragraph. City Council tried to ban it, but he stood on his First Amendment rights. This is why we have it today. Question?
What exactly was he trying to say exactly on his stone?
I think he leaves that for you to decide. You know, you can answer it for yourselves and have your own opinion on it. What he meant by it, I don't know. Yes.
Has anybody died in the cemetery?
Not in this cemetery.
Isn't an original quote from the mayor?
Yes. It was his writing.
Was he buried here because on another stone is another saying of his name?
Well, he is buried here. This represents the Secor family plot. You look around and you'll see different names because there were marriages, and this and M.M. Secor is actually right there. This is just a family monument. This is just what he decided to put here. He had the money to do it, he could do it. Who's hungry?
Me.
All right, now, who likes peanut butter and jelly sandwiches? Me too. But the key to the peanut butter and jelly sandwich is the jelly. What kind of jelly do we all like here? Let me hear.
Strawberry.
All right. Who said blueberry? Raise your hand. All right. Blueberry's my favorite too. I love it. So, the next stone that we go to is going to be the world's greatest peanut butter and jelly sandwich maker that has ever lived. Buried here. Follow me. Follow me, yeah. Okay, Ivan, so that you know. This is my mother. This is Connor's great-grandmother, Easton's great-grandmother, Stephanie's great-grandmother, and Izzy's great-grandmother. This is Jordan's grandmother. My mom was a wonderful person, okay? I really idolized her. And when she got sick and she passed away, it was left up to the family to decide how best are we going to remember Mom. There was a certain thing for each child. Cemetery symbolism. Okay, we were a Christian family. And my mom loved the Virgin Mary. And that's what my youngest sister remembered about her, because my mom lived with her. So on the front here we have a bronze plaque of the Virgin Mary. My mom also liked the lighthouse and the foghorns, and she loved to go sit on the lake. It brought her peace. Okay, it just, she was getting sicker, and it just brought her a lot of peace to be there. Her favorite bird that my sister had to keep full of bird food was the cardinal. And that's why the cardinal is here. So each one of my sisters, that's their remembrance. Now, I remember my mom. She loved to play bingo. And the story goes that one time, there was a very expensive pot that could be won. And she needed one number, I-16. And she had, the guy called I-15, and she was so upset she slammed that ink number down. It exploded over all the people on the table, and of course, leave it up to a Bedard to cause the chaos. That was my mother. So on the back of the stone, you will see, gone in search of I-16 and the bingo card. That's one of the things I remember about my mom. So everything in here, that's mom and dad to somebody over there, that's brother and sisters over there. That's why we're here. So when you come back and visit, I hope you find these things interesting, but please respect what you see. Some of it is irreplaceable. We are at the family resting spot of the Schellinger family. If you could see this in its original state, you would see Bible verses printed on the side. And if you look at it, it looks like a book, really. Very interesting. A lot of hand-carved, interesting things, symbolism on the side. The Good Book Monument, we call it. Now, the interesting thing about the Schellinger family, they made beer. He learned how to make beer from Valentine Blatz of Blatz beer fame. We used to make more beer than Milwaukee. It's only because we had a huge rock in the harbor that we couldn't get the larger ships in. And Milwaukee already had that larger port that they could get the bigger and heavier ships in. So the beer making kind of shifted to Milwaukee, Pabst Blue Ribbon and the Best Company and things like that. But we made a lot of beer here. The problem was the rock in the harbor. So they had a contest. How do you get rid of the rock in the harbor? Some guy said, let's blow it up. I guess Racine likes dynamite, I don't know. But that's what they did. They had got together and they blew up that rock in the harbor and were able to get in the heavier ships. But this is Peter Schellinger, and he was a brewmaster. Now there's still one old tavern that he was associated with. There was a Klinkert brewery in town, and that still exists today. It looks like a castle. It's down by the corner of Racine Street and 16th Street. The big red castle. Really neat looking building. Questions?
Why did they choose the Bible for a head or a family?
Good question. although I don't have the direct answer, I would compare it to my family. Why did I choose to put on? Because it's how I remember. The Bible was very important to people back then. So that's why they decided to put the Bible on.
Why was he in the brewing business?
It was a way to make money. It was another job. Somebody chose to learn how to make beer. Others chose how to make bakery. That's why we're famous for Kringles. All of those business started out as a mom and pop organization by two people that were working hard in their kitchen, and it expanded. And that's business. Yes?
What does it say over there in the corner of the gravestone? It says something like D.O. Paddock or something like that?
That was probably, the best guess I can tell you is that's who did this. He probably signed his piece of art. This is art. I'm going to show you some really interesting artwork that's in here in a bit. As I go through the records, I get to see how people died. And going through the records, I found Joe. His actual name is John Anderson. And he was an elephant trainer. And in 1898, the circus came to town. Joe was removing his animal, his elephant, from the train for some reason. The elephant got upset, went on a rampage. Joe was killed by the elephant. When the police came, they couldn't find anybody on the streets because this elephant was just rampaging the whole area. Eventually the elephant was put down by the police department. The real interesting part, though, is that for several years after that, the circus would come to town. They would come here to see Joe, their friend. And they would, in honor of him, because there were no stones at that time out back here, they would set up their circus acts, and they would do a little circus act for him in memory of him. He had no family. That's why he's here. He died here. They buried him here. But really, his family was a circus family. So they would memorialize him by coming and doing the trampoline and the high wire act and that. So we had a little circus in here at one time, just for Joe. That's how personal the cemetery really is to people.
Did Joe die from getting stepped on by the elephant or just by getting hit?
I know he was just killed by the elephant. That's what it says on his record. One of the things is that, again, this was Native American burial grounds, and they were the mound builders. So does anybody know why Park High School have the name Park Panthers? Up behind Park High School, there was an effigy mound, and it was shaped in the size of a panther. And that's why they're called the Park Panthers, because of that effigy mound. I know a lot of you probably know the name on this. You can read it behind me. But the question is, how many of you have had a malted milk? William Horlick invented malted milk. Now, it may sound like it's just a chocolatey drink or something, but it wasn't. It was very important. They had it, actually, when I was a kid, it was in tablet forms. It was so important that Admiral Byrd took it on his expedition to the Antarctic. It was issued to World War I soldiers because they thought it was so full of protein, it would keep them going. So it was very important. William Horlick was a very important man. And I'm going to let 2 by 2, if you want, go up, look inside. This is a mausoleum. Where do we get the term mausoleum? Look in it, look in the back. You'll see his head.
It's a dead person, dude.
Actually, it's the bust of William Horlick up in the right-hand corner. It's a very interesting, if you look inside, you get the time to look inside. You'll see a stained glass window back there. That stained glass window has been rumored to be a Tiffany production.
What's a Tiffany?
Okay, so it's a very valuable piece. But now, as you're looking, I'm asking a question now,
I didn't see
and
the dust right.
I need quiet. Where does the word mausoleum come from? The word mausoleum comes from a 6th century king, King Mazel. And the story goes is that his wife was in childbirth and she died after the 28th child. I don't know what the problem is there, but 28 children, I think, okay? And she died, and he wanted a place to honor her so badly that he built the first, what they call, mausoleum. That's where we get the word mausoleum, King Mazel. This is the Johnson family mausoleum. Sam recently passed a few years back, and he is buried in there. He's also buried in there with his stepmother, who was a silent film actress. Yes, she was. She acted in silent films. Would be on my right, there's a palm tree. Anybody know what that is? That's cemetery symbolism. It is the carnauba plant. That's what made Johnson's wax. Well, I'm the black sheep of the family, the only one that didn't work at Johnson's wax. I do this. I met Sam before he passed away. He was a wonderful person. Just a really great guy. We came out here to the mausoleum. He wanted to see it. He wanted to show 2 of his presidents from different parts of the world, just where this would be. This was built in about 1969 to 70 because of the carnauba plant. It's a $9 billion a year industry. Does anyone know how Sam's father, H.F. Johnson Jr., went about finding the carnauba plant?
He was looking for something to make his wax, and he built a plane to go down there and get it. Coincidentally, he named the plane the Carnauba.
He went to South America, yeah, saw the Native Americans using the carnauba plant to waterproof their boats and their roofs of their houses, and came up with the idea, this would go good in my wax. And so that's what led him to South America, because he had heard of this plant that would waterproof wood. H.F. Johnson Jr.'s grandfather founded Johnson's Wax at the age of 49. His name was S.C. Johnson. He originally was a hardwood floor salesman. S.C. Johnson sold hardwood floors, and it just so happens a housewife asked him, well, how can I keep it clean? How can I protect it? S.C. Johnson developed a parquet floor wax, mixing it in his bathtub. It just goes to show you that anything is possible. And today we have everything from wax to window spray. I have shown everybody old stones for the most part, but still today in this modern day society, death is very important, okay? I can't emphasize enough how really each one of us is going to have to deal with it in one fashion or another. And I like this one. This is my age, so to speak, because this person was my age when they passed away. This is a monument, and we call it our tree of life. And if you look at the tree, kind of wraps around. But what I really found interesting, and they put their own time and effort, and it was very important to it. Guys, remember your first love? And you carved your initials in the tree. That's how personable, that's how what it means to us. That's why we are a cemetery. This is a person, okay? So, again, you're welcome back. I love it. I think it's great that you're in here and that you find this interesting. We've passed hundreds and hundreds of stones. Please respect them. Yes?
What's the name that starts with like an S or something? Is their last name?
This is their last name. This is Spalding. This is Jeff. He died in 2004. This is his wife. That's N-E-E means her maiden name. Women like to have their maiden name because they were part of a family too. And they came from something and married this and took his last name. But Their family is just important. That's what the cemetery is about. The personality. There's a personality. He loved to ride motorcycles.
On the wife's dates, it only has one date. Does that mean that she's still alive?
She is still alive. She put the motorcycle here.
So when she dies, will she be buried here and they just carve in her death date, or will she be buried somewhere?
She will be buried on this side, and then they will sandblast her death date on there. Okay. When I started to do these tours, the reason that I started is one morning I came into work, back almost as far as you could see, headstones were pushed over.
Decades, even generations had passed without anyone or anything disturbing these monuments. That changed this past weekend. Officials at Mound Cemetery say someone or a group of people knocked over 24 headstones. Racine police say the vandals struck the cemetery sometime between Friday and Monday afternoon.
You could actually follow the path as to where the vandals came, went through, and up over the fence. Because over the fence is the golf course. Now, if you look back there, you'll see a big red ball. All right? If you go to that red ball, you go to the red one behind it, you go to the other pink one to the left, and to the big gray one. It continued on from one side of the cemetery all the way over to here. These headstones are valuable. They belong to somebody, and when you come in, please respect them, because they're not cemented in. They're not anchored down. All the little ones, the thousands and thousands that we've passed, honestly, you can cause a lot of damage in here. I can't tell you anything different, but I hope by going on this tour, you'll realize that this here was someone's father, grandfather, brother, uncle, something, okay? And show the respect that a lot of people do, and just visit and find out, but come back and enjoy. Question? Yes.
If you touch or step on one, is that disrespectful?
No, it is not. It's a good question, because I get that all the time. You are not being disrespectful, because each and every one of you are standing on somebody right now. That's not disrespect. What's disrespectful is when you push them over. When you run through and you push all of these over. That's disrespectful. Coming here to visit, touch, feel, get the feel of it, brush it off and read it, learn about that person's history, that's great. That's what I would like to see, because this is a wonderful place, as you can tell. We've got pictures of hawks and birds. I wish we would have seen the deer. It's just that special of a place. Not just this place. Every cemetery that you go to, those are people. They had lives. They had loves. They'd love to do something. They were human. And this is how they're remembered.
Have you ever buried an animal? Someone was really close to their dog and they wanted to remember their dog, but they didn't just want them to be in their backyard or something?
That's a really good question, because that's becoming important to people. Currently the rule is we do not allow animals in here. And I had a dog for 17 years. I loved that dog. His name was Digger. Can you tell what I do? Okay. And he was a beautiful dog, a loyal pet to my wife, both my sons and myself. He stuck by us for 17 years till he finally passed away. It would give me no greater pleasure than to honor him by when I pass away, having him buried with me. He was cremated and we have his ashes. But currently they do not. I would like to see that law, that rule changed so that we could include someone's pet. But right now we do not. And one more thing I wanted to tell you before we go is you all, as you walk around, you will see lots of flowers. Remember that those aren't your flowers to pick. Those are there for a purpose. and as such, respect those also. Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to the next. Another mausoleum, obvious. And whose mausoleum is it?
Jerome Increase Case.
That's what I was looking for. What does the I stand for?
Increase.
Increase. Okay. J.I. Case. Now, his family is buried in here. There's approximately 15 in here. There's also a man that's buried in here that was a Case. And I had the privilege of meeting him before he passed away. His name was Roy Case. Roy was the first white man in the state of Wisconsin to shoot a deer with a bow and arrow during an archery season. He was a very avid archer and a hunter. And I had the privilege to meet him. So, who knows about JIC? Who was that? Okay, it's not a who. It actually, I think, would be, and if there's a teacher out there, they could correct me, a what? South side of town was where the Case family had their operations. There's a street over there, said J-A-Y-E-Y-E-S-E-E. J-I-C. Was a horse. It was a trotter, and to this day, some of his records have not been broken. A trotter was a horse that had pulled a buggy, and they kind of had a race, and the horse had to be perfect in form. JIC was perfect in form. So good that Currier and Ives did a lithograph about it, a plate of the horse. However, the horse got old, and they had to put the horse down, and they buried the horse, and the kind of went on. Want to take a guess as to where the horse was buried? Not here, yeah.
At first I was going to get the trash.
No, I wish he was. Walmart's parking lot.
What?
Right. Every time you go in there and you go straight into the Walmart parking lot, that was a farm at one time. And when they were building the Walmart, I got a call from an older gentleman that said they're building the Walmart out there, and that's where JIC is. And I said, I don't know what, a Case is here, Barry. No, the horse is out there. So I talked to some construction people and a local historian, and they went out there. And this guy said, dig there. And sure enough, they dug up the bones of JIC. So he's not in the parking lot. He's in a Rubbermaid tub at a local historian's house. Okay?
Wow.
So, yeah. All right. Now, J.I. Case, he was a stickler. I mean, his tractors had to be perfect. So one time, there was a farmer in Minnesota, couldn't get his tractor started. So J.I. Case personally went out there and said, I'll fix it for you. So he went out there and tinkered around with it for a day and got so angry he got 5 gallons of gas, poured it over the tractor, lit the tractor on fire, and the next day the man had a new tractor. That's how important it was to J.I. Case. Okay? All right.
Is a J.I. Case a horse, Grandpa?
I don't...
And I've seen the top before.
You can see Mitchell, the name Mitchell here. Okay? This is Henry Mitchell. And over there is the Lewis family from the Mitchell-Lewis Cart Company. Now, they made really 2 things in their business during their existence. Their factory actually still exists. It's across from the police station. It's apartments now. But they made covered wagons at first. You see in the westerns the covered wagons that go west? They were the most popular, the best made this side of the Mississippi. After that fell out of favor and they started to get automobiles, it was at that time that the Mitchell-Lewis Company went in and made the Mitchell car. If you go down to the museum, you can see a replica of that car down in the museum. Also, the wagon that they used to make. Questions?
Was it the same guy who they named Mitchell School after?
And that is right. Mitchell School is named after the Mitchell family. Just like S.C. Johnson's, and that's where we got a lot of our names, obviously, for our high schools. All right, let's go to the tallest one, and I'll let you find it. This is the tallest one in the cemetery, and this is the Stephen Bull plot. Now, real quickly, Stephen Bull Fine Arts School is named after him, but when Case was sold, Case had 4 daughters, okay? And he divided his company up into 4 parts, gave each part to a daughter, and Stephen Bull had married one of his daughters. That's a quick thing. But to me, the interesting thing is look how, this is so tall, okay, that if you stand next to it, you can't see the top. But when you step back, you see something, and I want to know what it is, who invented it, and in what year.
I think it's a needle.
You have how many?
I know 2 of them. I believe it was the lightning rod by Benjamin Franklin.
Absolutely correct. 1789, Benjamin Franklin invented the lightning rod. The purpose of the lightning rod, real quick, is that when lightning would strike it, it would hit that rod and it would shoot it into the ground, and the electricity would be neutralized. Just help protect such a tall stone. Okay, yes?
How long do you think it took to make that?
That is a good question, okay? Because when this was put up, they didn't have big cranes that they do now today. They did it with in sections, and if you look, this is one section. This gray here is lead. Then there's another section. And so on and so forth, all the way up. So in other words, they had to use horses, scaffolding, block and tackle, and if I know my guys, there were a lot of bad words. So those 4 things it took to put this up, okay?
A lot of bad words.
This is the founder of Racine.
Yeah.
And Gilbert Knapp came here in 1834, 36, and thought, wow, this would be a great place to inhabit. This would be a great place to start a town. Got a mouth of the river and everything. So he landed here. Unfortunately, he could not get out when he came up the river. He could not get out of his boat because there were so many roots in the river. It was so heavily forested that they had to find a spot to land, which he did, and he came here, which we have the Root River. Now, we're actually called Racine. Okay, so can anybody tell me, number one, what language Racine is and what it means?
I think it's French and it means something of the root or something like that.
You're right. It's French. So when you say Racine, you're speaking another language. Didn't know that, okay? Now, real quickly, the Native Americans were here first. What do you think they called the river? It was Chippewaton. The Native American word is Chippewaton. It meant root. Actually, this area was named Little Canada because it was so heavily forested. Because this is our founder, you would actually think that this is his headstone. This is the founder of Racine's actual headstone. Gilbert was a merchant marine and thus entitled to a free headstone because our GIs, our veterans, are entitled to 2 headstones. That large footstone was added later on. This is the actual marker for the founder of Racine. So you're standing on them. Okay, all right. Yes?
Did this one originally have writing on it?
Yes, it did, because it says Gilbert Knapp on that side. I know. So let's go to my favorite one, shall we? We're going to walk straight across the street. This is one of my very personal favorites. And again, it's classic cemetery symbolism. The oak tree is a symbol of life, of long life. Broken, cut short. This looks like that tree. That tree right there is what we call a forest tree. The cemetery was built around it. its guesstimated age is about 175, which puts that 25 years before this cemetery was created. They grow a long time. That's the purpose for the oak tree. On here, you'll see that this is a broken branch. It's a sign of a life cut short. But notice the leaves on it. They're crisp, they're clear. Life will continue on, okay? On the side here is a vine. The vine is a sign of a growth in your faith as that vine goes up towards heaven. But one of the really interesting things that I like about this, being an outdoorsman, is that there was one tool that the settlers had to have when they came through this area to survive. What do you think that was? All at once? A double-barrel shotgun was hand-carved in the side of this. So that's an important thing. That's how they lived. That's how they were able to survive. This is German. It says resting place of the family. This was the Kell family. And their markers are right there. If you look, it looks like logs, and the bark is peeled back. Imagine hammer and chisel carving this out by hand. This was not done by machine. This was by hand. We mark this lot by the four corners. You'll see the Kell lot looks like a small tree cut off. You look over there, another one. You look back here, another one. You look back here, another one. That's how I know we are in the Kell family lot. When you ask me a question, where is somebody, I'm going to tell you block, lot, and grave number 5, because I know how to count them. So there is rhyme or reason. We can find people. That's how cemeteries operate. It's just that's how they operate. That's how we find and keep track of everybody. Question?
What material is the headstone made of?
This again is limestone. If you touch it, it's marble. Marble melts because it has a microorganism in it that constantly dies off, and it's being weathered. Maybe 200 years from now, this will be just nothing but a pole if it's not protected. And you can see the vandalism on it because I've had to repair it. It was pushed over here, and the gun was broken off here. So I know you guys are now going to respect the cemetery, but I hope that when you bring your friends in here, riding your bikes, skateboarding, whatever, and they go to, you say, don't do that. That's not the right thing to do. Enjoy what's here, but enjoy it in the right way. This is George Slauson. But I want to ask a question, and you think about this now. You don't have to answer it, but here's the question. Why do we have cars? Why do we have the word cars? And now I'm going to tell you something. In George's garage, George and a man by the name of Dr. Carhart put a steam engine on a horseless carriage. And they started to tootle it around town, but they didn't have an exhaust. It scared the dickens out of all the horses. And the city council got together and said, we can't have that, ban it from the streets. Passed an ordinance to ban that thing from the streets because it was so loud. So George and Dr. Carhart went back to the garage, they took it apart, and Dr. Carhart took it in a crate, went over to the 1908 World's Fair in Paris, where he was mistakenly named Father of the Automobile. Dr. Carhart. Now, I'm not saying that's why we call them cars, but I think it's a pretty interesting play on words. This is the last thing that I want to show you. I do enjoy it because this is a captured Civil War cannon from Fort Zillikoffer. It was a fort down south. Near the end of the war, it produced 6 cannons. Only 2 left. One in the private collection, and this one here. Now this used to sit out in the cemetery behind the case mausoleum. It was purchased by Henry S. Durand and brought here. And Henry thought this would be a great thing to have. Now, does anybody remember here, anybody my age or older, the boom that we used to hear for the 4th of July parade? Remember that? It was a boom and then okay. That was this, all right? So it was kind of active. It was so active that one time Henry and our mayor, J.I. Case, they didn't get along too well. And the story goes that Henry had a great idea. Let's see how big of a boom we can do. Well, he did that, blew out of J.I. Case windows, and Case said to him, Henry, you go, or that cannon goes. So the cannon was then put out behind the Case Maz, by the way, overlooking our Civil War soldiers that are out there. There's so much here. Long tour, we haven't scratched the surface. Not 10%. There is so much more here, okay, as far as history, lives lost, accidents, you name it, okay? This cannon was back there. I thought it should be brought up here to really showcase it. The fence that you see is actually original fence from around the 1900s, and we think it lasted up until about World War II, where the rest of the fencing and our sign that used to be over was taken down and used for the metal drives of World War II, because the United States needed metal to survive, to fight the war. So, and when I started, there was only this tube here left, and a generous donation caused us to get this carriage right where it stands. So again, this is just Mound Cemetery. Across the street in the Catholic cemeteries, there's even a Titanic survivor that goes along with the story with that. So everywhere you go, there's a story. Every cemetery you go to, there's a person. Please respect those people. And with that, I want to thank everybody for putting up with my tour. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want another one, I'm willing to do them. Okay, so thank you very much.